Welcome to True You Ministries. I'm Stacy Echeverria, your pastoral counselor. I am a licensed pastoral counselor whose own journey has taught me the importance of having a safe place to discuss the harder issues of life. I'm so grateful that you've joined me this week. You can learn more about me and my heartfelt desire to help people much like yourself who may be at a place of pain and confusion by calling me at 626-461-3344. That's 626-461-3344, or feel free to email me at info@trueyouministries.com. Now, sit back, listen, watch, and enjoy the show. And welcome to True You Ministries. Today I have a special guest with us, Dr. Mark A. Hicks. We'll be talking about a practical guide to learning love. Dr. Hicks, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes. And so before we get started on our topic, I'd like to read Dr. Mark Hicks's bio to all of you so you get to know him a little bit. He is an author, a speaker, a ghostwriter, and relationship coach with expertise in mental health and family dynamics. Holding a Doctor of Ministry, a Master's in Mental Health Counseling, a Master's of Divinity, and a Bachelor's in Psychology, his educational background reflects his unwavering commitment to understanding the human psyche and guiding individuals toward healthy relationships and meaningful lives. Over the course of his professional life, Mark has ventured into various spheres, serving as a minister, therapist, international missionary, recovery program director, disaster response coordinator, and radio host. His radio broadcast was a self-help themed program that aired nationwide in the Czech Republic as he served there as a missionary. Mark's calling is to spread a message of love that is practical, tangible, and a realistic life for everyone, regardless of your relationship experience so far. In his book, Learning Love, he teaches the 5 components of love anyone can learn and practice to build healthy, happy, thriving relationships. His second book, The Learning Love Bible Study, shows the biblical basis for the 5 components of love and how they are lived out in the lives of biblical characters, sometimes well and sometimes not so well. I can think of a few right now. I mean, they really are amazing. Well, thank you again for being on the show. I always start off my show with a personal story, introducing the pain of the show. Would you share with us a little bit about your own personal story around this topic?
Oh, absolutely. I started out really well in life. I have a wonderful set of parents, a great family, grew up in a happy childhood. And so I had every advantage when it comes to building relationships. And yet, early in my life, I didn't always know what I know now. I ended up in a toxic first marriage. It was a terrible situation. It ended in divorce. Still have the emotional scars for that one. And
Sure.
that was one of the things that at the time I didn't fully realize it, but started to plant a seed in my life of really wanting to know what is love and how do we live that out in a real way. That we,
Right.
especially when we come from a healthy family, there's a
Hmm.
lot of assumptions that we just know what it is, that it'll just
Right.
work. It just works.
Yeah.
It's just what we do as human beings. We love and it all
Hmm.
works out. And that's not necessarily true for a lot of people.
Hmm.
And that's kind of best case scenario. From there, we have dysfunctional families and toxic families and abusive
Right.
families, and
Right.
people who are raised in that really have no frame of reference for what a
Hmm.
healthy, happy
Hmm.
relationship is.
Right.
From that, I had that desire in my own life. But then also, I have a master's degree in mental health counseling, and a lot of therapy goes back to building healthy relationships,
Right.
not just at home, but also at work, in our
Hmm.
neighborhoods, in our
Hmm.
churches. How do we
Right.
live together in society? And then,
Right.
of course, from a ministry standpoint and from a spiritual standpoint, it's about relationships, relationship
Hmm.
with God,
Hmm.
relationship with one another, loving our
Hmm.
neighbor as ourselves. All these things led me in this path. So, from a
Hmm.
spiritual, theological standpoint, a psychological and counseling standpoint, and my
Hmm.
own very difficult past experience,
Yeah.
all those roads led to this place where I had this not only desire, but a place where I came to an understanding through the scriptures of what love
Mhm.
is. And
Mhm.
the five components of love that I teach in my book, the book is Learning Love, Building a Life That Matters, and Healthy Relationships That Last. It is inspired by the five books of the wisdom literature in the Old
Mm.
Testament. Now, there's no
Mhm.
place in the Bible that said, here's the five components of love.
Right.
But if we read those five books in a way that is looking for their overall theme,
Mhm.
it begins to emerge of what wisdom is. And the greatest wisdom is love. God is
Right.
love. And
Yeah.
there is no greater wisdom than love. It encompasses all of wisdom because
Right.
God is love. And
Right.
so I was excited to publish that book. It was a self published book in 2020,
Mhm.
but there's some late breaking news on that. It has now been picked up by Morgan James Publishing.
Ah,
So
congrats.
thank you. So that book's
Mhm.
no longer available on Amazon where I originally published it, but it will be
Mhm.
available in June of 2025 nationwide
Mhm.
where books are sold. And
Right.
pre-orders will be available this fall. And in the meantime, as we talk about these five components of love, if any listeners are curious and are
Mhm.
interested in the book, to hold you over, there is a free ebook on my website,
Mhm.
markahicks.com, that will tell
Right.
you about the five components of love that we'll talk about today.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, and congratulations on your book getting picked up. That's really exciting.
Oh, it is. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. I know I have my own personal story too. I actually grew up unlike you in a dysfunctional toxic household. And and this is not an opportunity for me to speak disparagingly of my parents, not at all. But they were also hurt and wounded people who did not have this particular tool in their toolkit, right? And so for me, I equated performance with love. So it was conditional. It wasn't unconditional the way that the Lord loves us, but it was if I performed well, if I didn't, get into trouble, which I never did. If I listened to my parents, if I just towed the line, right, then there would be love, right? And so I learned that in order to be validated, affirmed, and loved, I had to perform. I had to be perfect. And man, was that a burden. I couldn't ever get it right because it kept changing. The
Yeah.
the rules kept changing. And so when I came to know the Lord, I experienced through him what it really means to be loved. And in our culture too, with Valentine's Day coming up in February, it's the only month of love, right? It should be every month, but anyway, um where it's about a feeling, and it is a feeling, but it goes deeper than that.
Yeah.
It is an action. It's in the things that we say and the things that we do that show people that they are loved. So I really didn't get that in my family of origin because my parents didn't have that.
Right.
So you do what you've learned. And so in coming to know the Lord, to really understand, I mean, if you think about John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son so that no one would perish, but that they would have eternity with him. Oh my gosh, that should just undo us. The
Yeah.
way that he loves us. That scripture alone. Number one, it captures the gospel and that God is love, that he sacrificed and his son went willingly for us
Yeah.
so that we could spend eternity with him. So anyway, I'm thrilled about talking about this particular topic. I work with couples as well. I do a lot of counseling with couples, and I think it's worth them knowing, what does love look like? How do you walk that out in a relationship where maybe there's trauma there in that relationship? Because I do a lot of counseling with couples where there's a sex addiction struggle,
Mhm.
and then there's the betrayal trauma. I'll tell you right now, the betrayed wives are not feeling any kind of love for their husbands in that moment
Sure.
when they find out, right? But how do you still love him where he's at, right? And that's going to be tricky.
It is tricky. But one of the good things and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about teaching the five components of love is that
Mhm.
it means love is a learned skill set. So
Right.
even if you didn't get it from your family, or
Right.
even if you have been through a divorce, or
Yeah.
you've been through relationship trauma, or you've been betrayed, and you have
Yeah.
these tragic stories, there is a
Yeah.
path to start where you are
Yeah.
and get to a place where you can have loving connections, healthy relationships, in your family, in church, at work, in every area of life. Because
Right.
obviously, the relationship with your spouse is very different than it would be with a coworker.
Sure.
But though the intensity of that connection is very different, the components for building a healthy relationship are the same. And so,
Yeah.
in every area of life, wherever you start, that's okay. If you come from a healthy family, then maybe you have a head start. Maybe you know
Yeah.
already one or two or three of the components of love just naturally, and you just think
Right.
that's obvious, but it's because you learned it growing up. It was still a
Right.
learned process. You just learned it
Right.
before you can remember learning it.
Yeah.
But to
Yeah.
know that love is a learned skill set is I think the great hope that we can all have.
Yeah, amen to that. And before we get into that, I want to share some scriptures with our audience. One is that 1 Corinthians 13:13. But for now, these three things last, right? Trust, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And Colossians 3:14. Above all these, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together perfectly. And then Matthew 22:39. And a second is similar to it. You are to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think this was your note. It becomes a fascinating prediction of what psychological science is now teaching 2,000 years later. Would you like to expand on that just a little
Oh,
bit before we get into our
yes.
teaching and counseling aspects?
This is one of my favorite things. Jesus
Yeah.
said, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, let's look at
Mhm.
that for a second.
Mhm.
We need more love in the world. We
Right.
need as much as we can get.
Right.
So we see Jesus then sort of lowballing it, saying, yeah, okay, maybe you could love your neighbor more than you love yourself, but don't bother. Just keep it at the level you love yourself.
Mm,
Jesus actually is telling us, love your neighbor to the absolute maximum, because we cannot love people more than we love ourselves.
correct.
Psychologically, that is now being shown. Brene Brown is most famous for her
Yeah.
research on that.
Yeah.
Others have studied as well, but she's the most
Sure.
noted. And she is the one who said the phrase, "You cannot love other people more than you love yourself."
Correct.
So many people are looking to form relationships in order to fill that void and find a way to love themselves, to be validated. And it does not
Right.
work that way. You
Right.
have to love yourself.
Right.
Jesus was just reflecting what was the truth that we didn't know scientifically yet, we
Yeah.
didn't know psychologically yet, but it's now
Yeah.
being shown through psychological research to say what Jesus said was not lowballing it. It was
Right.
not saying, "Oh, it's okay, just love them at the level of yourself." It
Yeah.
was, we have no capacity to love more than we love ourselves, because
Right.
love is not a commodity like
Right.
money. You can't,
Right.
if you need more money, you can get a second job or take out a loan or borrow
Sure.
it from a friend or whatever. There's ways
Yeah.
to do it.
Mhm.
Love has to be grown organically. It comes
Mhm.
first from the Spirit, from God, from our
Yeah.
Creator. He gave us the
Right.
capacity. God gave us the capacity to love, and it is organic that has to be grown within us to love ourselves and
Right.
then love others.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And when you were saying, we look to others to fill us, and I'm reminded of this line from a movie, and I cannot stand this line. So it's from Jerry Maguire, and some of you are going to remember. You complete me. Oh my gosh. I don't like, who came up with that? You complete me? No. Only the Lord
Mhm.
completes us, right? Other people cannot complete us because we are all imperfect. And if we're looking to someone else to complete us or to fill something in us,
Mhm.
well, what happens when the relationship doesn't work out anymore? Are you now incomplete again?
Right. Yeah, God made whole people.
Right.
We are a complete creation in God,
Yes.
and that's the problem, is that a lot of people are getting their understanding about what love is and how to live it out from their family, which is often dysfunctional. And I like to say every family is nuts. Some just more functional than others. There are
That's
there are
true.
good ones out there, but even the most healthy families are a little weird. They're just quirky and odd. And when you take your
Yeah.
version of quirky and odd and weird out into the world, you're still going to have problems relating to other people from their
Yep.
version of quirky and odd and weird. And so
Right.
that's best case
Right.
scenario. When we
Yeah.
have dysfunction and abuse, that's where people are learning love. And then they're learning it from society, from movies, from
Right.
rom-coms and all of these kind
Yeah.
of things. And,
Yeah.
those
Fairy
may be
tales.
entertaining. Yeah, they're
Hmm.
entertaining enough. That's perfectly fine. I'm not criticizing if you would like to watch
No.
those. That's fine.
Right.
But understand they are not lessons
Mhm.
on how to live out a healthy
Mm-mm.
life of love. And so we have to
Right.
find other places. And that's why I'm excited to be inspired by the scripture to actually teach what love is.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Well, why don't we go into the teaching and counseling aspects of our show here, right? So you spoke a little bit about love as a learned skill set. Is there anything else that you want to add to that before we get into right? We looked at you did mention love is usually learned through the example of family, but family is not always a good source. And then the five components, right, that we're going to get into as well. Would you like to expand any further on love is a learned skill set? And I guess really the question would be, how do you help your clients learn love, and how do you help them uh develop a skill set in doing that?
Mhm. Yeah, when we grow up, we learn from our families. If you have a healthy family, you're going to learn one or two of these, probably, of these components of love, and
Mhm.
then we start assuming that we just know what love is. And if we're struggling, it's because the person in our life is messing up.
Right.
Or we find some other, maybe we blame ourselves, whatever it might be. We assume that love just comes naturally. And
Mhm.
very often, we as a people of faith begin to fall into that assumption because we're creations of God, we're creations of love. So it just should come naturally. Well,
Mhm.
that is true, but we also live in a fallen world.
Right.
And in a fallen world, we have to have the knowledge of how to live out love. And that's really the first lesson, is if we are
Mhm.
going to learn what love is and how to live it out in a practical, tangible way, it is getting past the assumption that everything should just work naturally. And that if it doesn't, then there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with my
Right.
partner, or there's something wrong with my friends, or whoever it might be. Uh,
Right.
Getting past the assumption that this should just be natural. People assume that love sometimes is like learning to walk. It just
Mm.
happened. Okay.
Mhm.
But the fact is, you did learn it, and you
Right.
had a healthy body and a healthy environment that allowed you to learn that process. And because you
Mhm.
learned it before you remember learning it, you think it's just natural. But it wasn't. You weren't born able to walk. You had to
Right.
learn how. Now, if you come from a difficult background, a dysfunctional background, or have these traumas in your life, then you may need to learn to walk again. Uh,
Mhm.
for instance, if people are in a car accident, they
Mhm.
may have some ability to walk, but they've lost it because of that
Right.
accident. But very often people can learn to walk again. They have to
Mhm.
learn that process. Love is the
Sure.
same way. You can learn
Right.
some of it naturally growing up, if you come from a healthy family. If not, you can learn it later. And if you've been through a trauma, uh, and you feel like that everything has been crushed, you can learn to love again. It is
Right.
possible.
Right.
And knowing that, understanding that, as I said, gives us the hope. It gives us that
Mhm.
place to start, to know
Yeah.
this is where I can go to. And knowing the five components of love gives a way to conceptualize it. So often, love feels like a million moving parts.
Right.
And it's like, what and how, what's wrong? How do I feel like I'm working as hard as I can at this relationship, but something's just not right. And we can't pinpoint it. When we
Right.
understand the five components of love, we can conceptualize we're doing well in this area, but not here. And it
Mhm.
gives us that place to focus, to find counsel, to work at it,
Right.
to communicate about it, to pray
Right.
about it, to focus our
Yeah.
attention so that we can get better. It gives us a
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And before we get into the 5 components, I wanted to say that, maybe it's gonna sound weird, I don't know, but I actually learned a lot about love through the dogs I had.
Mhm.
They they have this innate ability to just love, to love the
Yeah.
people that they're with, uh even when they're disciplined. They don't even remember, the next moment that they were disciplined.
Yeah.
They just want to be with you. They just want to be with you. And I always say, when I leave, when my husband and I leave the house and the dog is in the house by herself, it's not like she's happy and she's going to be throwing a party with all her dog friends. She's
Yeah.
not happy that we're gone. My husband will tell me that she howls for me when
Yeah.
I'm not at home. Right. And I just think, there's such a beautiful picture of loving their people no matter what. And it just comes
Mhm.
so naturally. And it's amazing, the Lord knew what he was doing, when he created the dogs. So it may sound a little strange or a little weird. Maybe there are people out there that do have dogs and you understand what I'm talking about, but it's really amazing how God, created them the way that
Yeah.
he did.
I think
Yeah.
that reinforces that this is an organic process.
Yeah.
It is a something that grows within us, and it's
Yeah.
part of our ability as creation.
Right.
And that's not limited to us. God is creator of all things, and so
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
love, that organic ability to love, is there, but it still has to
Mhm.
be nurtured. And we see
Right.
that, hey, and as you say, we even with our pets, we nurture
Yeah.
that love, and it just grows.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So why don't we dive into the 5 components of love, right? Leading to happy, healthy, thriving relationships. Starting with the first one. And I'm curious as to why this is the first one. Uh, Grief. And it's something that I'm experiencing currently. So I'm very curious,
Yeah.
about this one.
Yeah, people are very curious about that. When I get that question
Yeah.
a lot, that the
Hmm.
grief is the first component of love. When we
Sure.
talk about love, we assume everything is going to be a discussion of bubblegum and butterflies, that it's all sweet and beautiful, like how we see from the dogs. So you just expect that kind of love, and that is part of it. We get to that.
Sure.
That is
Sure.
certainly part of it.
Yeah.
But the reality is, in a fallen world, no one gets through this life without scars.
Right.
That you're going to be hurt along the way. Even if you come from
Mhm.
a good family, even if you grow up to find a good marriage and have a good home and things are basically good in your life, no one gets through this life without scars. And there are
Yeah.
some real hurts in life. If you've been through that
Sure.
dysfunctional family or divorce or something,
Yeah.
there are some things that are so painful that they leave a hole in your heart.
Mhm.
But what I want people to know is that you can live a really good life with a hole in your heart,
Sure.
that we can't undo the past, and we're not going to try to undo the past. You can live, though, with that hole in your heart and still go on to make connections and have healthy relationships and be in happy, thriving relationships in your life, even with that hole in your heart. That
Mhm.
story from your past is not the whole story. You
Right.
can you can you can recover from that, and that takes the process of grief. Grief is a
Mhm.
healer.
Right.
Grief is our comeback story. And
Mhm.
so it keeps us engaged in love and in relationships, even during the hurts of life. So many people, when they experience the hurt, they start putting up walls.
Mhm.
They start putting up barriers, keeping people out of
Right.
their life, pushing people
Right.
away,
Right.
trying to make sure they protect themselves. And what they're
Right.
doing is building their own emotional prison,
Right.
that they are keeping people out of their life. I worked with a
Right.
lady years ago who was, I think, 72 years old, and life was just crushing her. She was depressed. She was
Mm.
angry. She was full of rage and had been
Mm.
her entire life. And
Mm.
as she got older, she wasn't able to carry that rage and that burden as well. So it was really taking
Yeah.
a toll physically and emotionally and mentally on her.
Sure.
She came
Sure.
into the program where I worked. Long story short, the whole thing traced back to a falling out she had with her sister 50 years prior.
Oh my gosh.
She had
Wow.
her sister had been her best friend, her
Oh
closest ally. They had
gosh.
a falling out when
Mm.
she was in her early 20s. They never
Yeah.
spoke again. And she decided, if my sister betrays me, I can't trust anyone.
Right. And that's a false belief system
It's a
that
false
kept her in
belief.
prison for 50 years.
50 years.
Right.
She got
Right.
married, she had kids, she had a terrible
Sure.
relationship with all of them.
Sure.
She had people in her life, but she had a terrible relationship, always kept people at arm's length
Wow.
because she never grieved that
Right.
loss of her
Right.
sister.
Yeah.
Instead, she built barriers. Grief
Yeah.
is our comeback story.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
lady had
I
a
like
hole in
that.
her heart when she lost her sister, but she did
Yeah.
not realize you can live a good life with a hole in your heart. She
Yep.
never learned that. And that's what we need people to know, that if you want to have love, you have to do it despite the struggles and the pain and the hardships, some of which are going to be our fault, that we're going to make
Right.
mistakes, some of which are
Sure.
going to be done to us.
Yeah.
But there's going to be
Yeah.
hardships and there's going to be
Yeah.
pain. And so
Yeah.
laying that foundation that regardless of what happens, we have a comeback story. We have a way
Yeah.
of healing.
Yeah.
And that's really what we see. That's
Mhm.
inspired by the book of Job. Now, Job
Mhm.
is seen as the
Yeah.
great patient one, and he obviously does show some amazing resilience in the early chapters. But when you start
Mhm.
poetry, the chapter 3 through 38, it
Mhm.
gets really dark.
Yeah.
It gets
Yeah.
really painful to
Yeah.
read the book of Job. It's not just about his initial reaction. That's a big part of it. And
Mhm.
you know, he shows himself to be a man of great faith. So I'm not
Yeah.
downplaying Job, but it's
Right.
not the whole story to say he was patient.
Right.
He had great pain, great suffering, depression,
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
horrible nightmares that he talks
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Um, and so that, but there was a comeback story through
Yeah.
that
There
process,
sure was.
through that dark valley. There was a
Yeah.
way back. And so
Right.
Job really shows us what a person of faith does. They still go through that dark valley, they still go
Mhm.
through grief,
Yeah.
but it's not just a pick yourself up by your bootstraps and lean into the wind and grit your teeth. Job is
Right.
a grief process if we read the whole book, but there's
Mhm.
a comeback story, there's a healing
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that grief, even though we
Yeah.
can't undo the tragedy of the past. And
Right.
he never fully even understood why it happened,
Right.
but there was a
Right.
way back
Yeah.
to a good place. And that's what
Yeah.
grief does for us. When we have
Yeah.
that, we have a foundation for love.
Yeah, I love that. I know in the most painful times of my life is where I've learned and grown the most. And it's
Mhm.
where I've seen the Lord, just carrying me through. I mean, he's carrying me through something right now. And yesterday was not a good day for me. I was having a really hard time with my
Mhm.
grief and in just expressing, the grief that I was feeling with a trusted accountability partner and a trusted
Mhm.
friend who prayed for me, and the Lord was in it. He relieved so much of the weight of it for me, but I have to be going through it, right? Because I know with my clients too, I tell them, look, nothing ever goes away until it's resolved, right? So you have to feel to heal.
Right.
And the immediate thing that we want to do when we've been hurt by someone is to have the walls go up and the prison that we build for ourselves. But I think of the scripture where it says, we will have trials and tribulations, but the Lord came to give us life and to give it to us abundantly.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
and people misunderstand how that's going to work. It
right,
works through grief. It doesn't
right,
work through suppressing those feelings or
right,
running from them or
right,
trying to protect ourselves or trying to be tenacious and tough.
right.
That abundant life is actually found through the grief process of coming to an
Correct.
acceptance and
Correct.
being able to come back from those in a
Yeah.
healthy way.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next component is emotion. So speak to us a little bit about that.
That's the bubblegum and butterflies. That's the
I
one that
know.
everybody's looking for. Those emotional connections. So we
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
That's what we think of when we think about love is
Right.
connecting emotionally. Even not just with family, although that's our most important, but with
Mhm.
friends, with coworkers, of having those bonds there, of being able to go to work every day and work side by side with people that we do care about and that we build a life with, a work life, but
Mhm.
especially at home with our spouse, our children, uh, having those emotional bonds is absolutely critical part of love. That's the most
Right.
obvious of the five
Right.
components. Now, for
Right.
some people, this is easy. We don't have to teach
Mhm.
this. They
Mhm.
know how to
Mhm.
express emotion.
Right.
They're good at it. So we don't teach those folks. There are people though that are very introverted. They're very cerebral. They're not really in touch with a lot of emotions. Now,
Mhm.
that's okay.
Mhm.
You don't have to change your personality to have
Right.
healthy relationships of love. What I say to folks is it's a practice. Like any
Mhm.
other skill, you can learn
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
The key is people in your life who you care about need to know you care about them. And there needs to be
Right.
expressions of that. So
Right.
if that comes naturally, fine, go do your thing. If it
Mhm.
doesn't, practice. Learn to say I love you. Now,
Right.
if love you became a dirty word because of the way it was used against you and your family.
Right.
As you described earlier, and love was twisted and it had conditions on it.
Right.
Maybe love becomes a word you're not comfortable with. Say,
Right.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Say thank you when somebody does
Yeah.
something nice for you. Simple
Yeah.
gestures of expressing your emotion, your caring. Find ways of showing people that you care
Yeah.
because you care. And when
Right.
you do that, you're building those emotional connections. It may not be as lavish as some people would be when they're more naturally in tune with their emotions and express them
Sure.
easily, but that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
We all live different ways. We all are wired up differently. That's fine.
Mhm. Mhm.
God made us all unique, but
Mhm.
all of us need to express our emotions and have those connections. And that takes a bit of vulnerability,
Yep.
takes some practice. And
Yep.
that's why grief is, again, so important to get
Yeah.
past the hurt so we can be healed
Yeah.
enough to be vulnerable and express
Yeah.
that emotion.
Yeah, I love that. I have a client, I've been working with her and her husband now for about almost a year in the sex addiction, betrayal trauma arena. And she's very buttoned up. And it's been beautiful to see her blossoming into allowing herself to feel the emotions that she
Mhm.
experiences
Yeah.
and doesn't like hide, doesn't stop it, but allows herself to be vulnerable. And I tell the men, especially too, that that vulnerability is a strength, and it
Mhm.
is.
It is.
It really, really is. The Lord has given us emotions for a reason. And
Yeah.
He also experienced, the spectrum of emotions, also, all
Absolutely.
very much so in a very healthy way, you know.
Yeah.
But I always point my clients to Him. I'm like, well, He's the example. We
Yeah.
have a lot to learn from Christ, don't we? So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And a
So
lot of
so
people, I'm sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Especially you're right. Especially a lot of men
Yeah.
start to think that love isn't about emotion. Love is about commitment. Love is about
Mm.
duty.
Hmm.
Love is about
Mm.
fulfilling your. Yes, we'll get to that.
Yes.
Just as I said
Yeah.
earlier, we get to that. That you're
Yeah.
right. That's part of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can't ignore that second component because
Yep.
people in your life need to know you care, and you need
Right.
that for yourself. You need to
Sure.
experience that emotional bond of
Yeah.
of getting past just the commitment or just the
Right.
the fulfilling of duty of relationships. It is
Right.
about feeling that sense of connection. That's what really brings us together.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So our next component is practicality.
That's where we get to the people that are more cerebral, that were a little uncomfortable with the emotional side. This is
Yeah.
your thing. Uh,
Right.
Love has to be practical.
Hmm.
Emotion brings us together. Practicality keeps us together. Practicality is the way we live together well. It is that commitment that we
Hmm.
work through those difficult times. It is fulfilling duties in life, and that can be as simple as household chores, helping
Hmm.
kids with the homework, doing what
Hmm.
needs to be done to make the house and the relationships work. It means dealing with money issues if you're a married couple
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
doing that well together. When we miss out on the practicality component, we hear people say things like, I love them, but I can't live with them.
Right.
These are people that have an emotional
Right.
connection. They've
Right.
got that part right, but they're missing the
Hmm.
third component. They miss the
Hmm.
practicality. And this gets very common because, when we do depend on society and entertainment to give us a picture of love, they don't make rom-com movies about the practical guy that makes good decisions.
No.
And so it's all about the emotion. Emotion is important. It is the
Hmm.
second component, but the third
Hmm.
component is living well together in a practical way. And
Hmm.
one of the very difficult, most difficult aspects of practicality is some relationships have to end.
Yeah.
And some people push back on me on that one because they assume because I'm a relationship coach, because I'm a person of faith, because I come from ministry, because I come from counseling, that I would say
Hmm.
every relationship can be saved.
No.
Theoretically, theoretically, if you are all practicing the five components of love, if we
Sure.
are if we are all led perfectly by the Lord, then
Hmm.
yes.
Yeah.
But that doesn't actually happen in a fallen world, not all the
No,
time.
that's not reality.
It's not reality. So the
No.
practical reality is that sometimes relationships have to end. That is a
Right.
practical reality of life.
Right.
No one
Right.
should live in abuse. this
Correct.
this is the dust to stand from your sandals
Right.
moment.
Right.
that you
Right.
have
No
to move on.
toxicity.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Toxic
Right.
and abusive
Right.
relationships are just not
Right.
allowed. You can give
Right.
it a chance. I believe
Yeah.
everyone should be in counseling
Mhm.
because life is just too complicated. Life
Yeah.
is hard. We go to a
Yeah.
doctor for our physical ailments. We go to a dentist for our teeth. We go to
Right.
the mechanic for our car. Well, our
Sure.
emotional and mental health and our relationships are more important than our teeth. So
Yeah.
we should get help for that as well. And
Yeah.
so
I
it
agree.
it is a practical reality that we can work at it. We can get help, but there comes a time that some relationships have to end.
Yeah.
And don't make that
Yeah.
decision alone. Don't keep
Right. Right.
secrets.
Right, right. I agree with that. I've seen that with some of the couples that I've counseled where people need to understand that it takes two in a
Right.
relationship with the
Right.
practicality and all of that, right?
Yes.
And when you've got one who is just not committed, phones it in,
Right.
have to ask the question, what are you here for?
Yeah.
What are you doing? For me too, I am very much a proponent of marriage and having couples work it out because I believe if you put God in the center of it, it absolutely can work out. However, it takes both of you to make that commitment to doing the hard work, right? And living in reality. All right. She's not a princess and you're not Prince Charming and you're not there to rescue her. I
Yeah.
mean, these fairy tales that, I grew up on, right? My prince will come and save me. Well,
Exactly.
my prince is Jesus, and so there you have it. But it's this it's a perverted sense of love, really.
Yes.
And it's selfish too. And so when we really look at it through the lens of the Lord as well, it's selfless. It's thinking about the other person first. In the scripture where it says husbands are to love their wives and wives are to respect their husbands, but he's also called to lay his life down for her.
Oh, absolutely. He washed the feet of the disciples. That
Right.
that is a submissive role, and I think that gets
Right.
missed sometimes. That
Yeah.
when you say love your wife as Christ loved the church, Jesus
Right.
not only laid down his life, but
Right.
he washed the disciples' feet,
That's right.
which is
That's
the
right.
lowliest job
Yeah.
in the house. And so that
Yeah.
is a submissive role. Paul is calling in love, we submit to each other fully.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
And
And that's what
that's
we're
another practical aspect
yeah.
of that can be an emotional element as well, but it is
Mhm.
a practical, how do we live together well? And one of the
Right.
ways we do that is to give to the other person and to
Mhm.
be submissive to what their
Mhm.
needs are as they
Mhm.
are to us.
Right. Right. Which brings us to acceptance of the fourth component.
Acceptance is that self-love, because
Mhm.
yes, we have to accept the person in our life within reason, not abuse, but
Right?
yes, we're going to have to accept mistakes and moments that they are not at their best. But that ability comes when we can love ourselves, which we talked about
Right.
earlier. It is
Right.
that self-love, self-acceptance, self-compassion, that we grow that organic love within us, understanding our own value, understanding how valuable we are so that we can understand how valuable other people are. As Jesus said,
Mhm.
love your neighbor as yourself, because
Right.
that's the full capacity. Now, to do
Mhm.
that, we have to understand how valuable, how lovable we actually are. And one of the things that I write in the
Right.
book that I really
Right.
want people to see, if we could just imagine that there is a diamond the size of a
Mhm.
baseball that's
Mhm.
perfectly cut, perfectly clear, absolutely perfect baseball sized diamond, well, that would be priceless. Now,
Mhm.
if we took that onto a rural area and we rode it around in the muck and the mire and the cow manure, bring it back in, how much is it worth now? It's
It's still
still
priceless.
priceless. Exactly. It
Yeah.
has not changed one bit. It's
Nope.
still priceless if you know what it is. Now, if
Right.
you just look at the outside at that point, you're going to think that's just a lot of nasty. But
Yeah.
if you understand what it is, you don't care what it looks like. You don't
Mm-mm.
care how it smells or anything else. You want that because you know how valuable it is. And
Right.
that's how God created us. We are a perfectly exquisite creation of God's love in the image of God.
Yeah.
In this fallen world, we're
Yeah.
rolling around in a lot of stuff.
I
Sometimes
know.
because of our own making, our own bad choices, sometimes because of a lot of things that happen to us in
Sure.
this fallen world, we look pretty rough. And
Yeah.
so sometimes not understanding the nature of our own creation, we just look at
Mhm.
the outside and we think we're just a big
Yeah.
ball of nasty.
Right.
And we treat ourselves that way and we treat other people that way. When we
Right.
begin to understand that we are actually that exquisite creation, that
Mhm.
perfectly cut diamond,
Yeah.
that there is a an understanding that what is on the outside that looks so bad is not who we are. It's what has
Correct.
happened to us or the
Right.
mistakes we've made because we didn't
Right.
know any better or whatever
Right.
the reason was.
Right.
We When we understand that we are the exquisite creation of God, what's
Mhm.
not to love?
Mhm.
And when we can see ourselves that way, then we can start to see other people that way in their fallenness, and that's where
Yeah.
that acceptance comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I know with so many of the male clients that struggle with sex addiction, when they're not able to see who they are in Christ in the way that he's created them,
Mhm.
they drown in so much shame.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they are equating who they are with what they've done. And I'm like, no, no, no. Who you are is not what you've done. It's who Christ says you are.
Yeah.
And that never changes. So if you can get a handle on who it is that he says that you are,
Yeah.
then we can get to work.
Yes.
But it's so hard working with clients, not just the men, but even some of the women as well, where they're having a really hard time receiving that, right? They know in their head what God says about them, but they haven't had it they've not allowed it to make a deposit, into their hearts.
Exactly.
And so that becomes the challenge, right? And then the enemy, wants us to remember what
Yes.
we've done,
Yes.
right?
If we beat ourselves up enough, then the enemy doesn't have to do anything. We
Yeah,
we're not going to have good
not a thing.
relationships. We're not going to have
No.
thriving careers and lives and home lives and churches because we're beating
Yeah,
ourselves up and we're beating each other up. And we see a
right.
lot of that going on in the world. Uh,
Yeah, we
and
do.
that's all it takes is to
Hmm.
forget how valuable we are in
Right.
ourselves and to see
Hmm.
that same value in other people, not because they
Hmm.
deserve it, not because they've got it all together, but because we understand beyond all that stuff that we have been rolled around in this life, that we are an
Yeah.
exquisite creation of pure
Yeah.
love. When we
Right.
get that, it's easy to accept ourselves and others
Sure.
and what we've done
Yeah.
wrong. People are doing what they do because it's working for them on some level.
Hmm.
No matter how much it's messing up their lives, there's something
Right.
there that they're
Right.
doing the best they can at the time with what they know. The trick is
Hmm.
to know better,
Yep.
to learn, to develop, and to know that this is not working for you anymore. I've seen a lot of people too. I used at one time I was leading a recovery program for addiction, but also for divorce recovery and
Hmm.
dysfunctional family. Was everyone's in recovery for something,
Hmm.
and the key to that was understanding that, just as you said, what we've done does not define who we are. It
Right.
defines what we've done. And we can, once we understand that what we did was wrong,
Hmm.
then we have the power to change that. We have the power to make new
Absolutely.
choices. And we
Absolutely.
always have that ability because of grace to make those new choices and to live a
Right.
different life. And so,
Right.
again, what's not to love?
Right. Right. And we also need to know, hey, why did we make those choices? What was really the
Mhm.
motivation,
Right?
behind that? So there's a lot of trauma that's there. There's false belief systems that are there that are driving it. And then once people have an awareness, right, and they've identified, then they have the responsibility to begin changing that and make
Right.
better choices, right? But that's the hard work. So, which leads us now to the last component, which is passion.
Yes, and this is really a passion for life. This
Yeah.
is putting the wind in our sails, the fuel in our engine, enjoying the life we have. So many
Hmm.
people that want to build a life of love, it starts early in life. And we're
Hmm.
told by society, by our parents, by church, by a lot of different sources that this is the way you do it. You grow up, you get your education, whatever that might mean. You
Right.
you get your job, you get your career. You get promoted in that career. Got to get past that entry level stuff and get into a real professional career. You got to find that special someone. You got to have kids. You got to buy that house. You got to be in the
Mhm.
right neighborhood that you feel is right for you, whatever that might mean. And we have
Mhm.
this checklist of stuff that we do to build a good life together. And then people get into their 30s or 40s and they've done all of that, got a good
Mhm.
career, got a good life, got the wife or husband or kids and house and all these kind of things. And they think, is this it?
I know.
And that comes because we have an emotional connection and we may be living in practicality. And maybe we have come through some tough times and we've grieved through that in a good way so that we can have those emotional connections and live together well. And maybe we do understand the love of God in us and we do love ourselves and we love others. And we're doing all of these things very well. And then we think something's missing.
Mhm.
This can't be all there is. Well, it's not. We're missing the fifth component of love, which is passion. And the secret ingredient to passion is fun.
Yeah.
We've got to have fun.
Yeah.
Now, people will immediately say, well, you can't have fun all the time. I'm not saying all the time. I'm
No,
saying as much as possible because
right.
I'm not going to forget that life is very serious. That's why
Right.
practicality is the third component of love. And I'm
Right.
not going to forget that there are tragedies in life. And that's why grief is the first component of love.
Mhm.
But even as we remember those, let's not forget the fifth component that is passion, enjoyment,
Yeah.
fun. Fun
Yeah.
is not a dirty word. Some people
Nope.
begin to think that it is. They begin to
I
think that
know.
that's trivial and it's not
Yeah.
serious and it's not
Mm-mm.
righteous.
Mm-mm.
Fun is
Mm.
a powerful
Yeah.
ingredient to what love is, of bringing
Mhm.
that passion in life, of getting up every day to see
Mhm.
what the day brings, to love
Right.
what you do for a living and love the
Right.
people you work with, and to
Right.
love the people you live with in your family and enjoy
Mhm.
life with them. It's not just about doing household chores. You may have to
Right.
do them, but have fun doing them if you can.
Exactly.
Find ways of
Exactly.
having fun. If we inject
Yeah.
fun into our life, we have passion, and
Mhm.
that becomes the why. That becomes
Mhm.
why are we doing all this? Why are
Right.
we're looking to make
Right.
those emotional connections and live life
Right.
well together and
Right.
learn to love
Right.
ourselves and grieve through all these
Yeah.
difficulties of life? It's so that we can come to a place that we know that it's worth it. That
Right.
life is fun and enjoyable and passionate.
Yeah. Yeah. And it actually leads to, and this is sometimes I have clients where they just don't know what their purpose in life is. And I'm like, what are you passionate about?
Mhm. Yeah.
What are you
And
passionate about?
and I say to
You know?
folks, if you don't know what is fun, if you've been through, the dark valleys and you don't even know what would be fun to you, you've never had fun, at least you
Yeah.
can't remember it, and you have
Yeah.
no idea. I always say, congratulations, you get to just try everything.
Exactly.
Try it.
Exactly. I
Figure,
know.
draw something from a hat. Do some
Yeah.
random search on the internet, whatever.
Yeah.
Just try it. If you don't
Right.
like it, you're not out anything.
Nope.
And but you will find something. You'll
Yes.
find something that you truly enjoy that
Yeah.
brings you enjoyment, that makes you smile, that makes you laugh, and that
Yeah.
makes us healthier, happier.
Mhm.
It makes us better in our relationships when we
Yeah.
laugh together, when we play together, when we're
Mhm.
having fun. Just
Mhm.
try it. It
Yeah.
just like I said
Yeah.
earlier about emotions, if it doesn't come
Mhm.
natural, just work at
Mhm.
it. Same
Yeah.
is true for fun and passion. If you're not sure,
Right.
you can learn it. Just
Yeah.
experiment, play with it,
Yeah.
have some just free time to
Yeah.
try things, and you'll find it's like any other skill set. You'll find some things that you really do enjoy in life.
Yeah, I know for me, I keep it simple. I don't overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
I'm going hiking with a girlfriend tomorrow. We go every month.
Yes.
That's fun. I get to spend some quality time with a dear friend. She's like a sister, and that really is part of my own self-care as well. Because
Yeah.
I like you, I sit with clients and I hold space. And a lot of the emotional stuff is extremely heavy. Some of it's really dark too. And
Sure.
so we with the trials of life as well, we have to find a way to let off some steam and go and have fun and be that kid again. I remember loving going to the park and swinging, or hanging upside down on the monkey bars, or but as we grow older and as we get older and we have these life experiences, that tends to get zapped out of us. We don't give ourselves permission to
Right.
have that fun again, to be like a kid, just
Yeah.
to blow off some steam, just to be silly, just to laugh. I mean, my girlfriend, thank God she lives like 3 doors down. She's a neighbor, but she's a dear friend as well. And she's a prayer warrior. And we'll go walking and we bust each other up. We are like doubled over. That is just so good for the soul. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, we're not out there doing, whatever. We're not skydiving or anything like that. We're simply taking a walk, but we are connecting. We're talking about the things of life. We're praying and we're having a lot of fun doing it. And my soul ends up feeling lighter every
Yes.
time, I have that experience, which then allows me to sit with my clients and be in
Yes.
the heaviness with them. And so it really is about a balance. So I so appreciate, you expanding a little bit on these 5 components, which will bring us to part 2, where you'll get to expand even more with what are the practical steps in living all of this out. So stay tuned for part 2. It's going to be a great show. And before we go, uh, ways to get in touch with Dr. Hicks would be his email, drmark@markahicks.com, or his website, markahicks.com. This will be in the show notes, so you don't have to remember it. And then you do also offer a free 20-minute consultation, don't you?
I do.
So
Absolutely.
people want a little bit more information. Maybe they're looking into getting some counseling and they like what they've heard, in this segment. Reach out to Dr. Hicks. You don't have anything to lose. He offers a free 20-minute consultation. And I always like ending the show with a call to action. I love having the different guests that I have on the show. We talk about a lot of different topics. But first and foremost, for those of you that are watching and listening who don't know the Lord, who are thinking about, checking out, Christianity and what is that all about? He is knocking on the door to your heart and he loves you with an everlasting love. And he wants you to know him. He has a beautiful life for you. He has a plan and a purpose for every single one of us. And if you don't know what that is and you want to ask some questions of me, I'm happy to speak with you about what are the next steps in coming to know him. So if you listen to earlier shows that I've had, I've shared my own story of coming to know Jesus, and it took me 18 months. And I had an amazing woman who answered all the questions that I had in a year and a half, and I was out and I didn't have any more questions. And then the next logical choice was to say yes to him. And I've not regretted that one moment. So reach out to me. You can reach me on my website at trueyouministries.com, or you can call me at 626-461-3344. Or you can email me at info@trueyouministries.com. And I also offer a free 20-minute consultation. You don't have to have a consultation for counseling, but you can schedule that consultation if you have questions about salvation and what does that mean. So make sure you reach out. And even with Dr. Mark, I'm sure he'd love to speak with you as well if you have any questions with regard
Absolutely.
to salvation. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Dr. Hicks, thank you so much. I had a lot of fun in this first episode. I'm looking forward to part 2.
Thank you.
You've been listening to True You Ministries with me, Stacy Echeverria, your pastoral counselor. I'm a licensed pastoral counselor whose own journey has taught me the importance of having a safe place to discuss the harder issues of life. You can learn more about me and my heartfelt desire to help people, much like yourself, who may be at a place of pain and confusion by calling me at 626-461-3344. That's 626-461-3344. Or feel free to email me at info@trueyouministries.com. That email, once again, is info@trueyouministries.com. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and may God richly bless you.